Okay, can I tell you how excited I am to be on this unit? So I am excited because it's my favorite thing to teach. We're going to talk about, hold on, we'll get to that. But anyways, I am glad we're moving on. We only have 2 units left. So time is passing us by super fast. We're going to be done with this block before you know it. So what we are on to, drum roll please, the human body. Yes, how do you like my, not that they're trying to be pornographic or anything, but we are going to be talking about the human body, so we're going to talk about all parts and all systems. But on a bigger, grander scale, we're actually talking about the overall structures and organization of animals in general. And isn't it lovely that we are actually classified in the same group as these lovely creatures? Actually, I love dogs. But I'm glad we don't sniff each other's butt, to kind of get to know each other. But nonetheless, we are talking about animal organization, which is really cool because I think you guys are going to find this very interesting because when you learn about yourselves, you're kind of like, wow, I didn't know that. And it means so much more because it's about you. Okay, so let's start kind of from the basics. Remember this? I brought this up, I think, in the plant structure unit and maybe even before then. But what this is showing is basically it's showing the organization in the human body. Okay, we start off with a really small, little, tiny thing called atoms. And you can kind of hardly see this, but you'll notice that the atoms are kind of the basic unit of structure and function, which actually we know usually as the cell, but the most basic unit that is found within every single organism, okay? But then you put a bunch of atoms together and you end up with a molecule, such as DNA. Okay, so this is showing a DNA molecule, which is more than one atom put together. When you put DNA together, you actually end up with a cell, okay? So then you have a cell, multiple cells together, okay? So more than 2 cells together, 2 different types of cells make up a tissue. More than 2 different types of tissue together make up an organ, okay? And then organs that are put together make up an organ system, and organ systems make up an organism. So this is kind of the basic organization for all kind of the human body, but also organisms in general. We notice that the plant organization looks similar to this as well, okay? So let's move on. Also, if you guys recall in Biology A, we discussed the cell. We discussed plant and animal cells. So I'm hoping this kind of rings a bell just a little bit. But if not, hopefully you have some of your stuff. Go back and revisit. Okay, you guys need to understand some of these organelles and how important they are when they come together to make an organism such as us or all other kind of animals do as we do, because these cells are, again, what I've said, kind of the basic unit of structure and function in us and in animals, okay? All right, so know the basic structure components. You have of course, your nucleus. You have your cell membrane. Now, again, animal cells do not have a cell wall, okay? So you will not see a cell wall in any animal cells. But you'll have all these different types of organelles, okay? You have a Golgi apparatus. You have your mitochondria, which are very important in producing the energy that your body needs and your cell needs to function. You have endoplasmic reticulum, smooth and rough. You have ribosomes. You have the nucleolus. What else that is super important? The lysosomes, which break down kind of things that are not needed anymore in the cell. So all of these components and these organelles are very important to the cell. So please just go back and review them. For the love, you're going to need to know them. And when you go on to college, you'll learn this stuff again. So the more that you can learn it now, the easier it's going to be. All right, so on to tissues. So we talked about cells. Cells have all those organelles. But when you put more than one type of cell together, you actually end up with a tissue. So we have 4 different types of tissue. We have epithelial tissue, and I'll talk and give you guys examples of each of these. But epithelial tissue, right here, this crazy word, epi, always means on top of. So anytime you see epi, epicardium, epithelial, what's another one that I'm thinking of? Epidermis, okay, is your outermost skin layer. So epi means on top of. So you're going to notice that epithelial tissue typically is what covers things, okay? Our skin is part of the epithelial tissue. Connective tissue, just as it says, is going to connect things. Muscular tissue, we know what muscles are. That's a type of tissue. And then nervous tissue, we also know a little bit about the nervous system and nerves, which you're going to get to know more about. but nervous tissue is another type of tissue. So 4 different types of tissues that you need to understand. Now, you can see, I'm going to get into this picture a little bit more because this is a little bit more in depth about what we're going to talk about. We have the stomach that has all these different types of tissue. Smooth muscle tissue, so it's got muscular tissue. Loose connective tissue, which connects things, and we'll talk about that. Nervous tissue, because there are nerves that detect different things in the stomach, how full it is, what the hydrochloric acid levels are at, and so forth. You have connective tissue in the form of blood, and you have epithelium tissue, okay, which lines it. Okay, so let's go through that and kind of give a little bit more examples and a little bit more in depth to what each of those tissues are. So epithelial. So epi on top of, covering, lining, protection, and also good old secretion. So epithelial, these are actually pictures of cheek cells. Your cheek cells are a good example of epithelial tissue. You have layers and layers of epithelial tissue when it comes to your skin, because think about, and especially in your cheeks and on your hands, skin is constantly getting kind of brushed up against, and you have food in your mouth that can constantly scratch away some of those cells, so you need lots of layers. So it's definitely a protective layer, okay? So if any of you guys have ever done kind of a cheek cell lab, maybe in an old school or something, it's really easy. You can kind of just scrape your cheek cell and put it onto a slide, and actually if you guys go to the museum with me for our field trip, we can do that in one of the exhibits. So it's really cool because you can actually see some of the organelles. You can see the nucleus right here. This is a stained version, and this is a non-stained version. Okay, so there's many different types and shapes, so to speak, of epithelial. We have something called squamous. Squamous cells are the ones that basically, let me go back up. These are squamous cells. They're kind of flat shaped, not really round, but kind of oblong shaped, okay? So you have squamous, you have cuboidal, which are obviously like cubes, and then columnar, which are like in columns, okay? So those are different shapes that you're going to see epithelial tissue, and each one has a different function. Squamous cells are typically stacked up on top of each other. It depends though, it depends on where in the body, and again, that's for protection. A lot of columnar cells actually are for secretion. So then we also have layers of these. So simple squamous right here, here. Okay, simple squamous right here. So you have one layer of squamous cells, okay? And that's typically found in places like, probably, I'm thinking the lining, I can't, for some reason I'm spacing my mind where exactly that's found. But simple squamous would be a very porous place. So you can have diffusion back back and forth through a lining of simple squamous cells because there's only one layer of squamous cells. Where stratified squamous, which is multiple layers, this would be like your skin, like your cheek cells. You have multiple layers so that if the first bit of that layer gets sloughed off, you have more underneath, okay? You have simple cuboidal, so just one layer of the cube cells. Simple columnar. You also have pseudostratified. Pseudo means false, okay? So it looks like this is layered, a pseudostratified, so stratified means layers, okay? Pseudostratified means it looks like there's layers of these columnar cells, but really not, okay? So if you kind of look at that a little bit closer, you'll see that it's still actually one layer. It's actually simple, columnar, but this is called pseudostratified. And then you have transitional, that basically you kind of go from a cuboidal cell into more of what a squamous cell would look like. So these are all located different parts of the body for different reasons, whether it's for protection, for lining, for diffusion purposes, and so forth. Okay, so that's epithelial tissue. So here's okay, and I thought that I maybe had a slide that talks about where. So simple squamous, so lines blood vessels. I kind of was thinking that, and that spaced my mind. So blood vessels, you have oxygen and carbon dioxide constantly diffusing in and out of those blood vessels, right? So you don't want a thick layer, you want a really thin layer. So simple squamous is what's going to line those blood vessels, okay? So it permits the exchange of nutrients, waste, and gases. You have simple cuboidal that we talked about. It's going to line the kidneys, the tubules, and the glands. It's going to secrete and reabsorb water. Okay. Simple columnar lines most of the digestive organs, absorbs nutrients, and produces mucus. There's something called goblet cells that are typically found in these simple columnar cells. Goblet cells are primarily, their function is to secrete mucus. So take, for instance, the digestive organs, and sometimes even in the lungs. It's nice to have that secretion so that things are moving nice and easy throughout, different passages and so forth. Okay. Stratified squamous, which would be like your outer layer of the skin and the mouth. Stratified cuboidal lines ducts of sweat glands. Okay, secretes water and ions. And stratified columnar lines epididymis, mammary glands, and the larynx. Okay, that again secretes mucus. Okay, so that gives you kind of a better idea of where some of those epithelial tissues are found. All right, connective tissue. What tissue, what does connective tissue do? Well, obviously it's going to connect things. So when you see here, we see some ligaments, okay? These ligaments hold joints together, and they hold sometimes bone to bone together, so they hold bones kind of in place. But that's what connective tissue does, is basically it connects, it supports, and it stores. And I'm going to show you guys why it stores. You're going to be like, what the heck? And, supports, but connecting is an easy one. You can see that a lot of connective tissue is going to connect different parts of the body and hold them together, okay? Believe it or not, connective tissue can be hard as bone, or soft as tendons, or liquid like blood. So it's interesting that connective tissue, you have what we call like that cartilage, we call that hyaline cartilage that's in your knees and in some of your joints that starts to break down over time, and we call that arthritis. That's really hard, almost as hard as bone. And then you also have tendons that are really kind of soft, but then you also have blood that's also a connective tissue. We don't typically think of that like, wow, blood's a tissue, but yes, it's made up of multiple cells. Okay, we'll talk about the red cells, the white cells, the platelets, and so forth. But blood is a connective tissue. Okay, and that's one of the things that we talk about when we talk about storage. So here's an example. Here's blood. You can see that there's white blood cells, there's platelets, and there's red blood cells. Okay, many different cells coming together to form a tissue. Okay, so even though it's liquid, it's still considered a tissue. And blood in general can store lots of things. It can store oxygen. Also, there's, I don't want to get into this too much because we're going to talk about this in the skeletal system, but bone marrow has a lot to do with that too when we talk about storage. But so ultimately, it's also supporting the body through giving it oxygen, but most of it, it's storing up different nutrients that your body needs and takes them around the body, okay? So that's blood. That's one of the examples. Osseous tissue, which is bone, that is a type of connective tissue. Okay, you can look at a bone in more depth, and we'll talk about that with the skeletal system. Here's what we call an osteocyte, which is a bone cell. Okay, and when you take it apart further, you can see that it actually breaks down. This is actually a cross-section of a bone, and you can see, there's actually bone cells. So bone is a type of tissue. It's very hard. Actually, bone itself, I shouldn't say that. The entire bone is an organ. But when you look at this, there's lots of different types of tissues in here. You have bony tissue, which is the osseous tissue, but you also had blood vessels, so you have blood there. And then you have a bit of connective tissue that's usually on the ends of bones. So an actual bone itself, comprised of everything, is actually an organ. Okay. Hyaline cartilage, I told you guys about that. This is what it looks like under the microscope. Again, that's what kind of cushions your bones. So at your joints, say for instance your knee, you don't want bone on bone. So you have that protective layer in between so that it's not grinding your bones. So that's hyaline cartilage. That's a connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue, as well as kind of what makes up some of our tendons, ligaments, and other areas in our body that kind of need that support of that kind of a connective tissue. So that's what it looks like under the microscope as well. And then adipose, look at that. That's not ice cream. That's not whipped cream. That's fat. Yeah, that's what this is, adipose tissue. Under the microscope, it looks like kind of just big bubbles, so to speak. But adipose tissue is, again, another connective tissue. And, we tend to think of, oh my gosh, fat, that's horrible, horrible. But still, our bodies need a certain amount of fat. It is for protection. It's for lining, not necessarily lining things, but different hormones are made up of fat. So when we talk about connective tissue in particular, we are still talking about protection. It does kind of protect some things. Now, you don't want too much fat, because if you have a lot of fat that is surrounding some of your vital organs, it can start to cut off blood supply, and it's really not a good thing. But adipose tissue is still a normal thing at a certain level, okay? And then fibrous connective tissues, again, this along with the areolar the connective tissue makes up your tendons and your ligaments, okay? So fibrous connective tissue kind of looks similar to that. All right, let's go into muscle tissue. So muscle tissue is quite obvious. Isn't that the most disgusting picture ever? Pretty gross. But anyways, what does it allow us to do? What do muscles allow us to do? Think about that. We take for granted what our muscles do, okay? There's a lot of different functions, and they come into these different types of muscles. So let's talk about skeletal muscles first. Skeletal muscles are the muscles that basically we're most aware of, okay? Our biceps and triceps on our arms, and in our legs, and the muscles that basically allow us to move. That's what skeletal muscle does. It allows us to move. It's a voluntary muscle that we control, and we say, okay, arm, reach out and pick up that, okay? So that's the skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle is typically found a lot in the intestines and the digestive system, although there's also smooth muscle found in all of our blood vessels as well. But smooth muscle is something that we, again, take for granted because we don't control it. It helps us digest food. It helps things move down and move to different places. It helps move blood back to the heart and so forth. So smooth muscle is just this, and why we call it smooth is because notice the skeletal and cardiac muscles have these little bands like stripes. Smooth muscle does not, okay? And that's just one of the characteristics of smooth muscle. It does not have those, what we call striations, okay? So it's an involuntary muscle that definitely helps with some of the internal things that go on with our body. And then cardiac muscle is only found in one place, the heart. Cardia means heart. So cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. Obviously, it's involuntary. We don't have to tell our hearts to beat, but it's a very important muscle because it keeps us alive, okay? So, again, muscles are very important. They generate heat, they allow movement, they keep us alive, they pump blood, and they help us do all the other things, from digesting foods to doing other things in the body that we are not even aware of on a daily basis, okay? A closer look. We're going to take a closer look at this when we get to the muscular system as well, but if you notice this, and sorry this picture is kind of washed out, but this is a tendon here, and this is a bone, and then you have a muscle. So muscles typically are attached to bones by a tendon. And within this muscle, which is a muscle fiber, you have, well, I shouldn't say this is a muscle, and then you have muscle fibers that are found in here. And when you take this muscle and take it to an even smaller, more microscopic level, you can see lots of different things. You can see these, what we call these striations or these bands, are actually these filaments that move across each other. Okay, so when the muscle's contracting, it moves like that and it contracts. Okay, and then an opposite muscle has to act in order for the muscle to basically come to a relaxed state. You don't ever, it's not really a matter of relaxing. It's actually that an antagonistic muscle, so a muscle that works kind of in a pair. Like take for instance your bicep. When you flex your bicep muscle, okay, in order to get this muscle to kind of relax and lengthen, your tricep has to contract. Okay, so when my tricep is contracted, which when my arm is straight, that's what's happening. Your bicep muscle is actually relaxed. Okay, it's in a lengthened position. So that's what all of these little actin and myosin filaments do. So I'm not going to go into that too much because we'll talk about that when I talk about the muscular system. But just know that muscles are pretty intense. They're not just, something that we eat in a hamburger off of a cow. I mean, they're really pretty specialized. Okay, now talking about the nerves, nervous tissue. So obviously this is pretty darn important because think about nervous tissue. You have it in your brain, your spinal cord, and all the nerves that come off of there, okay? Because your spinal cord is just kind of the main hub that takes everything, all the signals to your brain. But then you have all those nerves, tiny little nerves that go throughout your body, okay? So pretty important. This is a picture of a neuron, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the nervous system specifically. But this neuron is a very specific type of cell. It does not regenerate. It does not, most cells basically die off, and then, you have new ones that are replenished. Nerve cells are not that way, okay? They live, for your entire lifetime, but, take for instance, if you're in a car accident and any of your nerves are severed, it typically does not grow back and you don't really get that function back. That's why there's paralysis. But nervous tissue detects stimuli, controls the body's response to stimuli. So not only does it detect it, oh my gosh, I feel cold. I'm looking outside right now and it's snowing out. So I'm cold. I can detect that because of my nervous system. And what's my body's response to that stimuli? Well, I might start chattering and shivering because what your body is saying is we need to generate heat. So the reason why you shiver is it basically is contracting your muscles, and when you contract your muscles, you're generating heat to try and keep those vital organs warm, okay? So that's kind of an example of detecting the stimuli and then controlling that and having a response to it. So again, here's the neuron, and here's what the neuron looks like, the nucleus, and we have the dendrites that basically detect the stimuli. That stimulus goes through the neuron as a electrical electrical signal. So that electrical signal is going to go this direction, and it's going to go out through these axon terminals, and either it's going to go to maybe your muscle, so it's maybe this is telling your hand that it's getting close to something hot. So this electrical signal is going to go down here. Maybe the end is a muscle saying pull away, okay? But this also could give it a signal and jump to another neuron, because remember, your body's pretty long. You can jump from neuron to neuron to neuron all the way down to your big toe. And again, if that doesn't all make sense, I promise we'll come back to that and we'll go over this stuff in detail. Okay, all in balance. I like these pictures, by the way. This is crazy, by the way, if that really is real. But homeostasis is a term that we're going to use throughout animal organization, but it's a term that I want you guys to remember because it's something that's so important that you're going to encounter on a daily basis. Take, for instance, right now we're in this season of being sick, okay? Anytime you are sick, you have a cold, you have the flu, anything like that, your body is out of homeostasis, which is balance, okay? So it's probably one of the most important terms you'll ever know, because when you're not in it, you're not doing well. So typically you don't feel good. Cancer, disease, all of those things are when your body has been taken out of homeostasis and typically cannot get back to that state. Now when we have a cold or the flu, we can get back to homeostasis within maybe 3 to 5 days. It just depends. But it's very important that we try to keep our bodies will do that internally. So I'm going to talk about that briefly. But it can be affected by changes both inside and outside the body. So homeostasis can be affected internally. So something that's going on that we don't even see. Take, for instance, a virus or cancer. Some of those things we don't see and we don't have the effects quite yet. But that's something that's happening internally. But also external, the environment, the air we breathe, whatever we are being faced with can also affect our balance inside and how our body reacts. So lots of harmful toxins that are out in the world can affect our homeostasis. And of course there's other things too as well. Okay, so I've got a video to show you guys, of course. So let me bring that up and we'll watch that and come back together and finish up.
Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. When you read, you begin with
A, B, C.
When you sing, you begin with do, re, mi.
Do, re, mi.
Do, re, mi. The first 3 notes just happen to be do.
Ah! Don't do this to me. It always happens when I'm trying to record a video, my YouTube video doesn't want to start. Okay, I might post that because I don't want to wait too long for that. Okay, I'll post that link if you guys want to watch it. It's just kind of a good way to kind of see some visuals with homeostasis. So do watch that, please. I'll post the link along with this video. Okay. All right. So moving on. Let's talk about how the body kind of keeps the body in homeostasis. But that's what happens. There's two feedback systems. There's negative and positive feedback. And negative feedback, both are pretty easy to understand. I'm going to give you guys, before I go over this type of example, I'm going to give you a very easy example for negative feedback. So take, for instance, it's pretty cold out, and you have your thermostat set to 72, which is way hotter than I have mine set. But you set it to 72, and all of a sudden, as it's really cold, it kicks on, the heater kicks on, and it gets up to 72, and it shuts down, okay? But then over time period, it gets, colder, and so then the heat goes on and brings it up to 72 and stops when it reaches 72. That's negative feedback. You're basically going in one direction, and then when you reach kind of that balance, you start to go in the other direction, okay? And you kind of go back and forth and maintain that homeostasis, okay? Maintain that balance, okay? So here's an example of somebody with, well, I think this is normal. So this is somebody who is eating and is controlling the blood sugar level. So if you have diabetes, you don't have the mechanism to control this. So I want you guys to know that this is a normal person. So you eat something, and anytime you eat something, your body's breaking it down into glucose ultimately. So anytime you eat something, your blood sugar level actually rises, always, okay? But in normal people, we have the ability to release hormones that help bring that blood glucose level back down. So high blood glucose levels is detected by the insulin secreting cells of the pancreas, okay? The pancreas secretes the hormone insulin, causing the liver cells to take up glucose and convert it and store it as glycogen. So that's what's happening, is it takes the glucose out of the blood and it stores it, okay? And then basically, as the body does that, the blood glucose level comes back to a normal, place where it's supposed to be. But again, in diabetes, you don't have this mechanism. Your insulin is not produced either enough, or your pancreas is not doing what it should be doing. So therefore, you have this constant, raising of the blood glucose level, and that's when you have to actually, people have to inject themselves with insulin in order to get this negative feedback started, okay, so that you can keep that, maintain that balance. So positive feedback, a good example of that is when a woman has a baby, okay? So basically, as that baby is nearing, childbirth, okay, so you start going into labor, you basically have the baby that pushes on the cervix, okay? And anytime the baby is pushing on that cervix, it's actually releasing, it's sending a signal to the brain to release a hormone called oxytocin. Well, oxytocin is carried to the bloodstream, to the uterus, and it stimulates those contractions and pushes that little baby towards the cervix even more. Well, obviously, then it's going to hit up against this cervix and release more oxytocin. So notice how a positive feedback is going in one direction, and then something's going to kick it to go even more. And it's going in one circle. So more harder contractions, the baby hits against the cervix, and more oxytocin. And that cycle keeps going until you give birth, okay? So it's not going in the opposite direction like negative feedback. It's going in the same direction. Okay, so we are pretty complicated, crazy beings, right? I'm going to go over very quickly just looking at the different organ systems that you guys are going to be hearing about in the next couple mini lessons that I record for you. So here are some that basically we'll talk about, but there are far more. So the lymphatic system may be a system that you guys aren't totally familiar with, so we'll go over that one. The respiratory system, which we all know a lot about, obviously the lungs and breathing. Digestive system, my favorites. Urinary system or excretory system, known as both. And the reproductive system. But there's a ton missing. How about all these? Okay. The integumentary, skeletal, muscular, digestive, respiratory, circulatory, lymphatic, excretory, nervous, endocrine, and reproductive. Now the ones in red are ones that maybe you're kind of like, I didn't know that was a system. So we're going to be touching on all of these. The integumentary system includes the skin. Okay, that's a huge system that is very vital. All of these systems are vital. You can't live without one of them, okay? The lymphatic system, we'll talk about that and what role that plays in our body, and the endocrine system dealing with glands and hormones and how important that is. And again, all of these systems tend to work together, okay? So our bodies are really amazing, amazing machines. I want you guys to really take that in as I start talking about the different the different roles that our body plays in the different systems and how they work together, and when one thing goes wrong, how it can really mean a lot of bad things, okay? So, that's it for now. Peace out, man. One of my favorite movies. Napoleon Dynamite, yeah. And I hope I'm, old like that, saying peace. Alright, we'll see you guys back for the next lesson.